Welcome to the High Context Podcast.
Conversations about living a full spectrum life.
My name is Ace.
And I'm Darian.
And we are sitting down with folks who inspire us daily as we dive deep into a wide range of topics, from art, music, history, and science,
to culture, consciousness, and creativity.
All with a focus on the collective while tapping into the individual and our relationships and connections to each other.
We like to think global while we act local.
Get in touch by sending us an email, highcontextpodcast@gmail.com.
Or follow us on Instagram, where you can find some archived live videos of our recording sessions at High Context Podcast.
We hope you enjoy these reflections as much as we enjoyed sitting down for these dangerous yet important conversations.
We look forward to connecting with you soon.
All power to all the people.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi. So, welcome to High Context, a conversation about living a full spectrum life. I am here with Darian Wigfall,
That's
DJ
me.
Whiz.
Yeah.
And my name's Ace, the girl from space.
Girl from space.
Atomic Ace. Lots of monikers these days.
Yeah, aka.
I guess mainly Atomic Ace is
Yeah.
what, since I'm now 30, I don't know if I could put the girl in the title. I don't necessarily know.
The woman from space?
That's too
The
many
lady
syllables.
from space, yeah.
I go with she, they.
Yeah.
So, Atomic Ace.
Yeah.
We don't have
Sweet.
to edit anything. All right. First off, I want to say thank you so much, Darian, for being a part of this project.
Of course.
And making this happen by being a conduit, a facilitator.
That's what I do. I love to do that. And just so people know, I'll also be hosting, but today we're doing a little bit different format. I'm being interviewed.
Yeah, well, we're establishing the template
Yeah.
for what is going to be coming down. We're going to be bringing on people that are really workers in their field who are making moves and who can relate to what we're talking about. Living a full spectrum life just means so many things, and I think there's a lot that we can dive into. So we're going to dive into Darian right now.
That's me. Hi.
So, Darian, what's getting you high right now?
Well, cannabis, number one. But right now, honestly, we are continually in this space of me doing some family history research. So up until about a year ago, just over a year ago, I didn't know much about how we had gotten land in South Carolina. And so I did a simple Google search, Wigfall Plantation, South Carolina. And since then, everything that you've seen from the Wigfall Discovery Project to just me talking about it has come from just like digging further and further because I found such compelling stories to begin with from Louis T. Wigfall, who people should look up, and then an enslaved person named August. Now, he didn't have a last name. Technically, I guess it would have been Wigfall and then Blow, but they didn't have last names at that time, so you can't really look him up. But if you look up John Wigfall and the Washingtons of Wessington, there's a good blog about August.
Gotcha, yeah. So to back it up a little bit, because we're going to dive into the origin story for sure. It sounds like taking a deep dive into your family lineage is getting you high, but when it comes to cannabis, like, what do you gravitate towards?
I prefer indica if I'm really trying to stay like hype for a party or something like that, sativa. But sativa sometimes gets me a little bit too on edge, so I like the indica because it just kind of slows me down and keeps me mellow.
Yeah, so when it comes to your consumption of cannabis, what's your preferred method of consumption?
Lately, I prefer the baddie or the one hitter, whatever you want to call it. I try to control my consumption. I don't want to like get stoned all the time, but I like to have a little bit of buzz.
Nice,
just
like a microdosing type of thing, kind of elevating your vibration a little bit.
Exactly.
When it comes to your cannabis use, like, what was your first experience with cannabis?
Man, my first experience with cannabis was like getting drunk and then trying it because like I was scared to try it at first, I guess by itself. And then I remember the first time I remember just smoking cannabis purely by itself and not having a drink or anything was in college at Mizzou, and I was with some friends. One of them had just got an apartment off campus, and so we could go smoke weed at his apartment. Oh, we're not in the dorms anymore.
Something novel.
Yeah, exactly. And we watched, he rolled a blunt, as my friend James from Ossining, New York, where the Sing Sing prison, Ossining prison is, if you ever heard of that. And he rolled a blunt, and I actually never had seen anybody roll a blunt before that. And we watched Scarface.
Like origami.
Yeah, I like watched him. I was like, oh shit, what is that?
Yeah.
And we watched Scarface.
Okay.
And we smoked a blunt and watched Scarface, and that was a really good time. I think I was 20 years old.
Yeah, I was gonna ask what year in school you were.
Yeah.
Sophomore, junior.
Yeah, junior. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I have a similar origin story with cannabis. It was college.
Yeah.
I didn't I haven't, most people I talk to when it's cannabis usage, usually there's a high school experience before 18 or something like that. So I didn't realize we really had that in common, where it was like, oh no, getting out of our normal upbringing space is what introduced these other mind states.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I was away from my parents and everything like that. Yeah, for sure.
For me, it has helped expand a viewpoint, or a perspective. So you said you were drunk at a party once, and then the blunt. Do you roll make blunts these days?
Not as much. If I know I'm going to be around a bunch of people and have a social smoking experience, I'll roll a blunt because I like to share a blunt with people.
Slower,
but it's a little, it's too much for me. I could smoke it and put it out, but I feel like that's just a waste.
I guess. Yeah, not a solo type of thing. Yeah. I'd love to dive into your origin story, but you and I kind of knew about each other through KDHX. We were both at KDHX and the same, we had overlaps in our experiences. You were on staff with KDHX. What was your role at KDHX?
I was the engagement event coordinator.
And for those who don't know, KDHX is a community radio station in St. Louis, 88.1 FM. And what did that role, in your eyes, represent?
Man, I was honestly a lot of the forward-facing part of KDHX at that time, because not only was I the liaison for any artist that played the stage, like every artist that played the stage, I was also the person coordinating tabling at events, and then with that, handling the volunteer coordination. So any volunteer that came to the organization around that time, or would have been interfacing, would have probably at least seen my name in an email. All the artists that come would have emailed back and forth a bunch, and then just when you meet people when you are tabling, it would be me and another volunteer. So
I'm mourn that we didn't have a chance to do that together.
Yeah, man. And just talking about KDHX with people in the community is such a joy. I've tabled for so many different things, politically, business-wise, social, whatever, yeah. But, I think that is probably the most enjoyable experience I've had tabling, because everybody loves it. There's nobody coming to, say anything bad. And even if they have something to say bad, it's probably about one DJ they don't like. It's not they don't like the whole organization. It's just I don't like... Yeah, exactly. They're engaged enough to listen, right? Even if there's something they don't like.
When someone doesn't like something, they're engaged enough to have an opinion about it.
Right. It means they're listening. So, that was probably the most enjoyable tabling experience I had. So, to me, it meant being one of the most forward-facing people for the organization of KDHX.
Fast forward to last year, there was a lot of disruption within KDHX in 2023, and throughout that, you and I had run into each other. So when we came back into each other's lives, it was due to the Cola Lounge.
Yeah.
And
shout out to Cola Lounge, Brennan.
Yeah, for those who don't know, Cola Lounge is a cannabis consumption, a private lounge off Cherokee Street, ran by Brennan England, who is a force within the community as for good and for coordination.
And we're back.
So at the Cola Lounge, I was just there in and out real quick that day, and had run into you and sparked up a conversation.
Serendipitous.
Yeah, kind of saying like, hey, there's these things going on with KDHX. There's folks that are trying to organize for a better outcome here, and I'd like you to be part of the solution, or at least let's talk about your experiences and stuff like that. What were you there doing at the Cola Lounge that day?
I was releasing an EP with my friend Jelani Buchanan, aka BaqBeet, BaqBeet. So it was actually the first time I'd released music of my own as a project of my own, and even in collaboration with somebody else. So it was the first time of me releasing my own music, really, and we were having a listening party at the Cola Lounge. So,
gotcha.
Yeah.
Tell me more about what it was like leading up to that moment, and how I didn't stay for the listening party, so tell me about the listening party. Tell me about what it's been like working with Jelani, and it sounds like you're in the producer role. Yeah,
producer. Yeah, making beats. Yeah, it was interesting. I kind of try to walk myself through the process that I walked a lot of artists through before. I'm not so, I guess, in tune with like trying to get a bunch of people to listen, or like really trying to like over market something. So I just am putting the music out more in the line with Jay Dilla. I don't have his books in here, but he's on the wall.
That's what you look up to as an example.
He's a producer I look up to as an example. And after reading his biography and learning about just like how many beat tapes he was just putting out in Detroit, and that's how he got a name for himself, I was like, well, I would like to do that too. I'd rather have the music speak for itself than just be like, hey, everybody, listen to my EP. Now, obviously, I'm going to put it out there and let people know. And he was doing the same thing, but he didn't have social media. He didn't have social media back then. But obviously, he was going to DJs and be like, hey, here's a tape. Until people were like coming to him like, yo, do you have anything else? And that's sort of the approach I'm trying to take. And that was the first project we put out, and that listening party was good. We had a small crowd, but they were engaged, like you said, like we were talking about the KDHX audience, and we got some really good feedback, so it helped. And I did some little online feedback stuff too, so I kind of took those things into consideration for the new project that we just started.
Kind of like some on-site market research in a way.
Exactly. Yep.
So just to touch on Jay Dilla a little bit, if someone wants to, maybe they've never heard of Jay Dilla, or like haven't taken a deep dive into Jay Dilla, where would you point someone to start with first? Like what album, what single, what would you recommend? Their biography? Is there a doc? Like where do you start with Jay Dilla?
Okay.
Or what was your first experience with Jay Dilla? Let's start there.
Yeah, my first experience with Jay Dilla was Slum Village. So I knew about Slum Village probably when I remember Tainted coming out and being popular, but I remember having heard Climax before. And so I didn't know who had made the music at that point, but I believe kind of around the time that Kanye West was coming into the music industry, Jay Dilla seemed to be a little bit more in the forefront, like they were putting him in videos and things like that. So that's how I found out who was making the beats for Slum Village, but I had heard him rap even on some of those tracks. And so I found out about who Jay Dilla was like maybe a few years before he passed. Now, for those that don't know, he passed in 2007 from some complications from a very rare disease, which if you were going to start looking for Jay Dilla is talked about in a book called Dilla Time by Dan Charnas. And it is very comprehensive. It's the most comprehensive book I've read on him so far. I've read probably 3 books on Jay Dilla so far. But I would go back and listen to, Old Slum Village, maybe Fantastic, Volume 1, start there. Because if you start with Donuts, it doesn't really give a good representation of his musicality. And like what he was famous for, and what he's famous for is like using micro rhythms and not using the quantized function. He's famous for taking that off, right? Or even when it's on, he'll nudge a snare forward or nudge a snare back. Just to give
right on the beat.
So it kind of feels like a human form of somebody playing drums. So you really need to listen to that to understand why he was such a phenomenon. And I think Donuts was more of a, if you read Dan Charnas' book, it was more of a, if I can be frank, I'm going to show you motherfuckers how to sample. You think you know how to sample, I'm going to show you how it's done. Kind of, honestly, a shot at Kanye West specifically. It's interesting to read about his later life and his kind of bubbling beef with Kanye West, and to think about he was about to collaborate with Dr. Dre and potentially Kendrick Lamar, and it's like, man, if only, if
a
only,
different universe,
yeah,
a different multiverse,
right?
Yeah.
So yeah, super motivated by J Dilla, but I'm also motivated by Kanye West and Dr. Dre and Pete Rock and DJ Premier and Tyler Creator, really of producers that are doing stuff in the new era of hip hop.
Nice.
Yeah.
So J Dilla as inspiration, like as an example of how to produce your own work, and then working with Jelani, producing BaqBeet, the release party at the Cole Lounge. What has your, just to kind of dive back into the cannabis realm, what has your experience of cannabis culture in St. Louis been like? Have you had much experience with it? Are you more on the periphery? Are you involved? What does it feel like to you, and where do you see cannabis in Missouri or in St. Louis going?
I'd say I'm on the periphery. I'm just a recreational user, I guess. But I'm friends with Brennan, and anytime I can support what he's doing. And he tells me about things that are happening in the cannabis community, but I'm not as familiar with some, maybe even yourself, that have been involved. But I do think that it's much like many of the other communities here in St. Louis, is that it's very, it's tight-knit, it's familial, sometimes can be working in silos, but regardless of which silo you're in, people are usually pretty supportive.
Yeah, and so the reason why I ask is because much like the music industry and much like the music community, the arts community, the cannabis community is also one of those high context cultures. When we meet with our guy, how we treat our guy matters for our exchange of goods and money, and how you treat your guy, it influences how the quality of the product comes out when you get your stuff, if he's going to drop off to you or not. When he comes over, y'all are hanging for a second, or maybe you go to your guy, and that interaction informs your business relationship.
For
We're not thinking cannabis necessarily in this gray market way as a business, but it is, it's an exchange.
That's real, because I still go to somebody that's not licensed to get flower. Now, I have gone to Suede. That's actually the only dispensary I've been to in Missouri, and it was a very nice experience. But I have been with my guy for so long. Speaking of that relationship that you build, I didn't want to just be like, oh, okay, I'm done with you because I can get it legally over here. It's like, well, but we have a relationship, and honestly, the prices are basically the same. So to me, I would rather support somebody I know, and I know his vision of what he's doing with Toth from Hoth. I can say this because it's not like it's not like people don't know. In the music community especially, people know who this is. But he's got a skate park in the back of his house, and he's trying to build a complex for skaters in St. Louis, and he works pretty closely with the folks at Skate Laborious. They helped him do the concrete work at his place, and obviously he supplies for them. And so I would much rather support that than I don't know who owns Suede, you know what I mean? Or or any of the other ones. Yeah, and I've heard I've heard things. So I'm not necessarily trying to switch to supporting them, you know what I mean? So
yeah, having experience for myself with the commercial cannabis experience, it's been interesting because I feel like a majority of the owners in Missouri of these cannabis companies use cannabis very differently or way more seldomly than their patients do. And, there are some exceptions to that, but, you'd think that the owner of a cannabis company would be as enthusiastic about the product as their workers and their patients, but that's not always the case here in Missouri or in the United States.
I guess it could be a money grab for some people.
But when we're talking about the gray market, people are invested in a different way.
Yeah.
And in a very intrinsic way.
He makes me 3 degrees of separation from Dilla because Toth from Hoth has a song with rest in peace the Mad Villain, MF Doom. So MF Doom has also worked with J Dilla directly. So
chills. I've got
Yeah.
chills.
Ghost Whirl is their song together. So if you ever get a chance, Toth from Hoth and
Yeah, I
MF
think we're
Doom.
gonna have to make a
Ghost
playlist for
Whirl.
each episode.
Yeah.
How
For
fun
sure.
would that be? A nice way to
Restart
engage.
that.
We talked about your origins with cannabis. We talked about a little bit about your origins with producing.
Mm-hmm.
Can you go reverse chronologically, starting with the passing of your father, to tell me more about your origin story and your family's origin story?
Sure.
And your preservation of the story of the Wigfalls and your family lineage. Everything that you've been telling me about it, I'm seeing a bigger picture
Right.
being told in your family's lineage.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
This concept as above, so below, right? That things, whenever you look at a huge thing, it's the same as the little thing. Like the magnitudes don't change. The movements that happen within these structures that are made. So
it's like
up to
Cloud
you how
Atlas.
you want to tell this story. But how did you start to investigate your lineage, and how has it affected your life? Like, tell me more about your origin story.
It really does start with my dad, because I've known about. So my family, Wigfalls, owns land in South Carolina, St. Pawleys Island, South Carolina. And I've known about it since I was a kid. I've heard about it at family trips. My dad has told me about it. We've talked about it millions of times. And I'd never been. I'd never visited. I'd been to South Carolina, parts of South Carolina, but not Pawleys Island. And when he started to get sick, well, after he had been sick for a while,
What was ailing him?
he had Parkinson's, and he also had prostate cancer that ended up spreading to his bones. So he was dealing mostly with the cancer. That was what took him out. But he was sort of dealing with some dementia there at the end. But yeah, so he lost a ton of weight and had to have surgery, spinal surgery, because it was the kind of cancer that's additive, not subtractive. So it was making his bones grow and pinch his spinal cord. And so he had lost some mobility and things like that. And so by the time he had lost mobility, my family, my cousin Chuck, and he and my dad had been sort of handling getting the taxes paid for the land for a long time. And so...
You were taking on that responsibility as
right.
his son.
Uh-huh. And so I was talking to my cousin Chuck about, well, we're paying the taxes on this land. Why don't we do something with it that will benefit the family more than just having it, right? There's a few families that are living on it, but there's hundreds of us, right? So, is there a way that we can, develop it or sell it or whatever it is? And so we decided to take a vote. We took some votes. Most people voted to sell it. And so I sent a letter as a result of that vote, my dad being one of the people that voted to actually lease it versus selling it. And everybody got up in arms. They're like, oh, who's selling land, blah, 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 this and that. And it's well, everybody voted to do this, and now we're not going to do it. What's going on? And so we decided to have a family meeting in South Carolina in December of 2022. And at that point, my interest had been piqued enough to be well, where did we get this land? And because I was oh, maybe there was a plantation here. I literally stayed, when I went to visit, I stayed at a place called Pawleys Plantation Golf Club and Resort. So it's next door to the land that we own. I could literally see it across a golf hole from where I was staying, because I picked a certain room on purpose. And it's got the name plantation in it, because there's plantation everywhere, plantation this, plantation that, everywhere in the South. So I was well, maybe it came from a plantation. And so I Googled Wigfall Plantation, South Carolina, SC for short. And I found Louis T. Wigfall. That was the first person that came up. But he came to find out he lived in Edgefield, South Carolina, which was 4 hours away from where I was. So I was wait a minute. Okay, if the Wigfalls didn't even live out this way, how do we get land here? And so I just started digging, and
the red string started coming out.
Started pulling the tab. And
so what I'm hearing is that as you were looking towards the future for this property that your family has ownership of, it asks you to also look at the past
Yes.
in this present moment.
Yes. It was because of that moment I was compelled to start documenting, because I didn't go there with any intention of making a video or anything. I was just there to represent my dad in a meeting and facilitate a Zoom call, because we had a Zoom call earlier in the year that didn't go well because they didn't know about Wi-Fi and these other things that would have helped the signal be better. And so I was like, well, let me just go to South Carolina and facilitate the next one so that people can, even in the recording, have a solid understanding of what transpired.
I'm hearing you meeting your family where they're at. And that's, I think, something that we want to bring into this podcast, as well as accessibility. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, because, I don't expect older folks, most of them are over 60. So I don't expect them to understand Zoom, and especially from their phones and trying to have other people. And it can be difficult, even as a young person. So, I just wanted to help in that way. And then my curious brain led me to find out all this other information about where the Wigfall name actually comes from, because I had seen there's a group called I'm a Wigfall on Facebook, and it's all black people for the most part. There's a couple white people that joined recently. Which I should reach out to them, but I don't think they're from South Carolina. But anyway, somebody had posted...
Explore that inquiry, yeah.
Somebody had posted something years ago about it coming from Southern England, the Wigfall name coming from Southern England. And so I was like, okay, that makes sense, Wigfall, and there was like Wig Tree, and it comes from this and that. Come to find out, it doesn't come from England, it comes from Scotland, which makes more sense as far as like the etymology and the I don't know the word for it, but the
like wordsmith. Of the last
exactly.
Name,
How
the
it's
last name really means.
Wigfall's
Oftentimes it's a vocation.
It sounds more Scottish to me. Or like Gaelic, that kind of language. So that made much more sense to find out that Samuel Wigfall, first Samuel, I'm calling him, comes from Scotland and moved to England, and then had second Samuel, who moved from England to South Carolina, and then thus propagated the Wigfall family in the U.S. and then enslaved folks from Sierra Leone and different places, which is where my people come from.
Just to kind of go back a little bit, you said that you didn't have any intention of making a video when you went to South Carolina. Walk me through what you were feeling. What was the impetus to make a video? Was it for your family back here? Was it for your family in South Carolina, or were you hearing a parable?
I think it was a parable, even from the beginning, because the first person I found was Louis T, and he had enough about him where I was like, oh, I gotta do something about this, because he fought to keep slavery. He fought for the Confederate side of the Army in the Civil War. He became a U.S. Senator who then espoused slavery and states' rights in the U.S. Senate. And
Louis T. Wigfall.
Louis T. Wigfall. Louis T. Wigfall.
Well, sorry, St. Louis.
Yeah, right. Again, and then so many like synchronicities with names.
And this
and
is
like
a
that.
European lineage individual, or are we talking?
He's fully born in the U.S. If I look it up, I have him right here. If I look it up, I got their line. Louis was born in 1874 in Edgefield, South Carolina.
So was this a part of the family that owned your family, or is this a part of the family that was owned?
Yes and no. So yes, he was part of the family that owned mine.
Okay.
But that's also complicated because, it's blood, right? So, but everybody takes... So, Samuel Wigfall comes here from England and has a family that spreads out. All of those people owned enslaved people. So all those enslaved people took the last name Wigfall after enslavement. But they are not all necessarily blood relatives because there are multiple plantations, right? So I've looked it up, at least 4 plantations. Charliewood, Richland, Fairland, and another one that I'm forgetting right now. Technically, Louis could have owned people that had the last name Wigfall but aren't blood to me, right?
Sure. Yeah, I wasn't sure if Louis was one who was enslaved.
Yeah, he was an enslaver.
Yes. Okay.
For sure.
Cool. Thanks for clarifying.
Yes. Very much so. He's very proud of that.
So you start filming, and you're hearing this story that we hear maybe a couple chapters in the history books.
Yeah.
Growing up in an education system.
Yeah.
Speaking of education, I know that like our larger story is getting this documentary made. I am excited to support you in this.
Thank you.
But I'm also in this moment curious about you.
Okay.
Were you born in St. Louis?
Yep, born and raised in St. Louis. I was born at what is now Mercy Hospital, was St. John's Mercy Hospital then. And I'm the only person in my family that is born in St. Louis. I don't know if I can tell this story, but I feel like it's the high context part of what's happening with the documentary. It's such a, I guess, serendipitous or divine flow to get me here, because my dad's from North Carolina, my mom's from Kentucky, my sister was born in Kentucky and then lived in Chicago before they moved here. And then when we find out where I work has a direct connection to the second story I found was about August. So a direct connection to the second person I found in this research. It's like I was put here for a reason. You know what I mean? I've known about the Blow. Matthew Lee, I told you about, my second cousin. I've known his name was Blow since I was a kid, but it never, until I did this research, that didn't dawn on me that, like, oh, that was another family that enslaved people that look like us, but we have the same blood, because they share a great-grandfather or something like that. But, yeah, I just feel like me being born in St. Louis was on purpose and not my own purpose, right? Like, I'm serving another purpose for ancestors whose stories weren't told and need to be.
So, give me more context on what Blow means for St. Louis.
So, Blow for St. Louis, if people aren't familiar with Susan Blow, she's the person that, at least west of the Mississippi and most likely for the U.S., is the creator of kindergarten, the concept of kindergarten, of going to school before.
United States' first kindergarten was here in St. Louis.
Yeah.
From what I understand.
Yeah. There's some people that argue that there might have been people on the East Coast that may have started it before. But
well, something that I meant to mention before was that someone told me recently that St. Louis actually had the first skate parks.
Really?
Yeah. That,
wow.
It actually predates the stuff on the West Coast.
St. Louis is the first in a lot of things. Mm-hmm. Shelley versus Kramer, Dred Scott. The first place to play.
It's a very active space.
Sugar Hill Gang, Rapper's Delight,
Right.
Well, that was East St. Louis technically, but still St. Louis related. Yeah, St. Louis. I mean, yeah, one of the first, probably the first World's Fair west of the Mississippi. Yeah, a lot of things started here, which is kind of wild because we're in the middle of the country. So you would think things would start on the coast because that's where people are coming from Europe, coming from Africa, and hitting the coast first. But yeah, St. Louis has a significance to this country, at least from my understanding in some native cultures, that it is the heart of the country. So
yeah, when you told me about this, I was already playing around with this idea of if and when we find solutions that are truly for all. That when implemented in this space, they'll ripple out through the entire Western world.
Yeah.
And then you come into my life and tell me about the concept of how the indigenous people to this continent see this area of the land.
Even if you look at our boundaries, it looks like the anatomical heart. If you look at how humans develop, the first things to develop are the heart and the brainstem. So if that is carrying through with even culturally, we would be the first for a lot of things. The brainstem maybe be in New York or something like that, but we would be the first to develop a lot of things.
When you explained it to me, you said the East and West Coast are seen as the left and right hemispheres of the brain, and we all believe that thoughts come from our brain, but truly they come from our heart.
Right, they're processed in the brain.
And our tragedies in our country and the tragedies in our Western world and the tragedies in our city here are coming from the heart and can be perceived as heart attacks.
Yeah. The Black Lives Matter movement being amplified so much so that people think it started here after Mike Brown's death is because of that phenomenon. We did something here and it rippled out. And I remember going to the Bronx New York and talking to some of, East Coast people are pretty not emotional, right? Like, and probably not gonna give the Midwest especially a compliment, at least before I'd been up there in 2015.
You gotta earn your stripes with the East Coast.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But they were like, it was because of y'all that we went out, and stayed out for Eric Garner, because it was a year later. He had already been killed, and like the police officers, I don't think were even on trial yet, and they went out because they saw us on the news. And hearing that from an actual New Yorker was crazy to me. But like, again, if the heart is where the thoughts originate and then it's processed in the brain, then of course New York and California would have been like where it rippled to next, and then back throughout the rest of the body.
And so we have this, there's a lot of different concepts going through right now. Too much caffeine. Okay. So you were born in St. Louis, and you grew up here. And we're talking a little bit about education.
Yeah.
What was growing up in St. Louis like for you? Where in St. Louis are you? Where did you go to school? Not asking where did you go to school, just so I can judge you, because I wouldn't know what that like means. That, so, yeah. I don't have a shorthand or whatever, but I'm batching my questions a little bit.
That's okay.
Trying to give you options on how you answer what you're answering. Yeah. Where did you go to school, and was it public or private? Where in town are you?
Yeah, right now I'm in Cheltenham. We are in Cheltenham, but I grew up in unincorporated St. Louis County between Creve Coeur, Ladue, and Maryland Heights. I would call it Creve Coeur because we went to a church called First Baptist Church of Creve Coeur. The closest sign for a municipality to our house is Creve Coeur, so I would call it Creve Coeur.
You know what Creve Coeur means in French?
Broken heart.
Broken heart? Like, we're just
telling
ourselves that story over and over again, aren't we?
Again, like you said, all the levels, right? At each level and every point. At every point, and each time, every time it hits this, it's like a fractal, right?
Yeah, it's like a fractal, and it's, what if, I hope that one day we're not a broken heart.
Yeah.
Like, what happens when we change the story?
Yeah.
And keep celebrating a better story, and then removing and not necessarily removing, but processing that trauma enough to remove.
Do you know the lore behind that?
Behind Creve Coeur? No.
The Broken Heart? It's actually a story about...
new here.
It's actually a story similar to Pocahontas. So apparently
I'm from Virginia, so she was my favorite Disney princess.
There was a European settler that met a native woman. French European settler that met a native woman coming here as a trader. Fur trader.
One who trades.
Yeah, one who trades, not like a trader of the country. They wanted to be together, and they couldn't. So, because they couldn't, she killed herself. And they named it Broken Heart after her. And he named it Broken Heart after her. Because of her broken heart, she committed suicide. I think there's a story that she jumped off a cliff or something like that, but don't quote me on that.
Like somewhere in the area?
Yeah, somewhere in that area, yeah.
I didn't know we had our own Romeo and Juliet. Like real.
Yeah.
Like real Romeo and Juliet.
I learned this as a kid, and I was like, man, that's
Do we know
so
what
sad.
Range of years this was in?
That's a good question. We'll have to do some research for
like
that and follow up.
1600s?
Yeah, it would have to be 1600s, 1700s.
Because that's around the time that Romeo and Juliet was written. I am very curious to dive deeper onto this Creve Coeur meets Romeo and Juliet.
Yeah, we got to find out when that was happening. Yeah, because timelines, we're looking at this family history stuff. The timeline thing is just like, it's like patterns repeat over and 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 over. Yeah.
Brittany Howard.
Yeah. It's wild to see these things happening in just my own family and researching my own family. It's so
and
wild.
How radical and revolutionary is it to believe that we can change that story?
Yeah.
And stop the repetition of the Mal story, but begin the celebration and repetition of
that kind
better,
of brings me back to your original question, is like, what was it like growing up there? It was like growing into a broken heart. Because, like, as a child, you don't care about skin color or whatever. But over and over, as I got older, as a real young child, kindergarten and kinder care and stuff like that, I didn't really ever have an issue, or at least notice it, right? Because you're not cognizant of what's happening, really.
And you're probably also in that time experiencing your own somatic release until someone tells you that's weird.
Yeah, right. But as I got into like second and third grade, I noticed
as society is permeating into you with
different
its
treatment.
That's when you notice that.
That's when I noticed teachers would treat me differently. Not every teacher, but there were certain teachers where it was like, oh, you seem to be angry at me or whatever for whatever reason, but I didn't do anything, right?
Tell
like
me
I'm
more
just
about
sitting
these
here.
Teachers.
There's two teachers in particular that I can remember: Miss Fadum and Miss Mashoff. Miss Fadum was my 5th grade math teacher, and Miss Mashoff was my 6th grade science teacher.
Yeah, paint a picture. Tell me more.
So 5th grade, I was always a good student. I just never really had to study much. I just could pick up what you were teaching in class most of the time. So
sounds like you were engaged.
Yeah, I was engaged, but I didn't study a lot. I had very terrible study habits. And so I was really doing well in Miss Fadum's class, and it seemed like, for whatever reason, she was trying to find a way to, like, get me to not do well. And then I ended up not doing well on one quiz. And then we were at recess and walking back from recess, and I remember her being in between two other teachers. I can't even remember if they were in our grade or not. I just remember her, short blonde hair, glasses, piercing blue eyes. And she was like, and Darian failed a quiz again. And I was like, as I'm walking by, right, like, clearly, like, looking at me and saying this to make sure that I know that she's saying it. And I was like, I'm not even going to acknowledge that. But first of all, that's a lie, because this is the first one I've failed. And second of all, I'm not going to fail anything else for the rest of the year. And I didn't. And it was just like, the books that I'm reading are telling me that this is the ideal country. Everybody's equal, and, you know, we've passed civil rights, and we don't have lynchings anymore. We don't have all this stuff. We're all supposed to be good. But, like, I still feel like there's a certain thing, and it seems like it's about my skin color, but I'm not sure. And then I get to 6th grade, and, like, there are more black kids in this particular class, in my science class, and so...
Because you went from elementary school to middle school?
No, it was in the same... Yeah, it was in the same...
All in elementary
it was all in elementary school.
This
was Craig Elementary School.
And is that public or private?
Public. It's public school in the Parkway School District. This is before middle school existed in this district. Before we had junior high. So we had K through 6, 7th and 8th, and then 9 through 12. And then the year after I left 8th grade, they added 6th grade onto middle school. So that Parkway Northeast is now a middle school, not a junior high, where I went. But yeah, 6th grade was still in the same building. And in science class, all the black kids in that class were not doing well, including me, and I think I had a B. But, like, I should have had an A, just as far as, like, being able to do, like, we didn't have as far as I remember, now, obviously it's fuzzy because it's been, like, 30 years, but I remember not getting as many opportunities for extra credit and just being seemingly graded harder. Now, I think I ended up with an A- in the class, but I just remember feeling like we didn't have the opportunity to do better. And a lot of them were in my same kind of category when it comes to, like, knowing science. Because my mom is a science teacher, so I had a background before even coming to this class that taught me a lot of the basics. So I was doing well regardless, but they didn't, right? So if you're just coming into it new and fresh, it's going to be hard. And all of them ended up with, like, C's and D's. And I just remember being like, man, this isn't right. Like, what's going on? And I even remember some of my white classmates being like, Miss Mashoff doesn't teach y'all the same way she's teaching us. And so...
Yeah, so it sounds like you're experiencing discrimination when what's right, the point of education is to create a way for knowledge to be accessible and meeting the students where they're at and having enough compassion to teach.
Good point.
I mean, it's 2024 now, and we're in an education crisis, but it sounds like from your perspective the education crisis has been existing far longer than that.
Sure.
Compassion is not the currency of, schooling, whether it's administration of schooling enough to pay their teachers enough, recognizing that, or having compassion enough to make sure that everyone is, equanimity is having the opportunities to to have those touch points into the education that's needed.
I'd argue that it's just like every other system in the U.S. at least. It's made for Protestant white males that come from a high class. And so I think the characteristics of people like that is very uncaring for the most part. Maybe there's some rich people that are super compassionate, but I don't. For the most part, at least my examples of like Jeff Bezos, Warren Buffett, Bill Gates, they're not the most touching people. So if the system's built for them, then yeah, that's why the rest of us aren't doing so well.
There's a lot of people. I was talking with someone earlier today. There's a lot of people who believe that the game of life is won by how many dollars are in your bank account.
Mm-hmm. There are people that believe that. How much
you've spent or how much you've earned.
Mm-hmm.
And
I do not believe that.
That's not true. Yeah, it's not. One, is there really a game of life?
Right.
I mean, one could argue.
You could argue. Yeah, we're talking about simulation theory.
Yeah.
We're here playing, right? Exactly. Mm-hmm. We got in the game.
We're playing our own game. We're making our own rules. And you'd think, part of education is like play fair.
Man.
Play kindly.
Yeah. Good
Don't
sportsmanship
be a sore loser.
says that. Yeah.
Be a good teammate.
Mm-hmm.
And have respect for your coach. Have respect for your teammates.
Yeah.
Have respect for yourself.
Yeah.
And so you're experiencing discrimination within your public education schooling, within this Creve Coeur, St. Louis County district. And what year range are we talking about here? Like, just to set the, in case anyone wants to relate,
I was 10 and in 5th grade in 1991, and then 11 and in 6th grade in 1992.
Yeah, I was born in 93.
Wow. Oh, I forgot one specific experience that really taught me that we were going to be treated differently by police when I was 9 years old. So we're rewinding to 3rd grade.
Yeah, tell me about it.
And there's this place in St. Louis called Tillis Park. It's on McKnight Road. If you ever drive by there during the holidays, they have a big Christmas light celebration.
When I would visit St. Louis to see my grandparents over Christmas, I do know about
there
Tillis
you go.
Park.
Yeah, even people from out of town know about it. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So my mom wanted to take me, but she didn't have enough money to take me in. So she was like, well, let's just drive by. And she worked, so we couldn't get there till, obviously in winter, the sun's going down by 5 o'clock. So we couldn't get there till like 5:30, something like that. So the sun's down. We're driving slowly by the park so I can kind of look in. And then a police officer pulls us over, and then we pull into the neighborhood, one of the little neighborhoods that's there to the east of the park. And he pulls us over, shines a light in the car, is like, what are you doing in this neighborhood? And my mom tells him, we're looking at the Christmas lights. We were just, here to look at the Christmas lights. And he's like, well, why are we driving so slow? It looks like you were casing the place. And I'm listening to this conversation. And she's like, well, I was slowing down so my son could see the lights. And so he shines the light in my face. And he's like, okay, can you step out of the car? And I don't know what happened outside the car, but my mom got back in and she was visibly disturbed. And she really didn't say anything on the drive home. We just drove home. And the next day we had to talk about, like, if you get pulled over by police, this is how to operate, right? So that was a pivotal moment in my life.
What was her advice? Did she explain what happened to her? Like, She never
did say what happened to her. I think she would struggle to remember now. But she never did say what happened to her. She just, the next day, almost tearfully was like, you put your hands on the wheel. You say, yes, sir, no, sir, yes, ma'am, no, ma'am. If you need to get your insurance out of the glove compartment, announce it first. Don't reach without saying anything. And make sure they acknowledge that you've said so. If they ask you to get out of the car, be as respectful as possible. If anything is going to happen, you're kind of at their mercy. So these are the things that you have to try to do to not get to that point, right? And so that was.
Now this is all advice that I would say that anyone being pulled over would get.
Yeah.
But what did she tell you about how other people perceive you and her? That did she provide any more context to that conversation?
No, she was just like, if you don't do this,
you
can lose your life.
At 9.
Yeah,
so
no, exactly right.
Yeah,
exactly. I'm not driving at that point, not for another 6 or 7 years. But it was just like, if you don't do this, you could lose your life, basically.
Those who discriminate don't understand.
Yeah.
Aren't trying to understand.
Right.
Aren't going out of their way to understand.
Right.
Yeah, and so, unfortunately, it's put onto those experiencing that conflict, and you have to be even more understanding of the context of the situation and be as calm as possible so that no one can go out of their way to blame you for being you.
Yeah, just being you. Just, yeah.
So you're growing up in St. Louis, going through school. You know, what was your first entry into music production? Like, were you in a music program in school, or what was your favorite thing about growing up in St. Louis before going to Mizzou?
I never thought about it, because I always think about the first time I made a beat, but if I think about my first actual experience with music productions, it's at church.
Okay.
It's in choir, and like putting Sunday choir performances together, or like Easter or Christmas or something like that, and then having to work with a musician, like a drummer and a keyboardist and a organ player. And I didn't get into playing instruments till later, but that was what inspired me, that choir experience, what inspired me to want to play instruments. And then I ended up playing,
They handed you the key.
Yes, they handed me the key. And I was just watching musicians play and just being enamored by the drums, really. And the organ, it was very interesting to me too, but it was just, there was a lot going on with that, so I was like, I don't know.
It's almost mysticism with the organ.
Yeah, it's like a magical thing.
Yeah, exactly.
For real. I was like, the drums make sense. Stick to thing, and it makes a sound.
I can see it.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not hidden.
Yeah, exactly.
There's no man behind the curtain on that one.
What it is, what you get. But yeah, so I was watching that, and then I guess I have two introductions because I was at Parkway. Man, it's kind of wild now that I'm thinking about it. It was the same year that Tillis Park thing happened. Because in third grade, they not make you, but it's required that you play an instrument in an orchestral production. So like,
oh wow, cool.
It could be a violin, it could be viola, it could be cello, it could be bass, it could be timpani, it could be chimes, and there are a number of different things that you could play. And before that, they had us play recorders just to get familiar with music and notes and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's the ORF education, yeah.
I think we did that from kindergarten, but I think a lot of people do that. But I was able to play violin. So yeah, I got a chance to play violin in third grade. I kept playing that to fifth grade, but then I discovered Dizzy Gillespie. And I think it was just like a documentary film or something we watched in class.
Jazz musician.
Jazz musician, or maybe watching PBS or something like that. And I was so, his cheeks when he played, because I liked Louis Armstrong too, but it was Dizzy's cheeks when he played. I was like, how does the human cheek muscle expand like that? It's just,
he's playing trumpet too.
Yeah, he's playing trumpet. Yeah, exactly. So I wanted to play trumpet, and so in sixth grade I switched to trumpet, and then I played that up through eighth grade. But I also did school choir in seventh and eighth grade, all the while doing church choir I did that through high school, but I stopped playing instruments in high school because I wanted to play sports, and it would be really hard to do band and sports at the same time.
Practice,
exactly.
Were these music interactions in school your favorite part about school, or was there another subject that maybe came easy to you, or you really enjoyed the teacher? Science. Yeah.
It really came easy to me, and not even so much from my mother's instruction. I'm a curious person, so like the scientific method and the scientific process of discovery really made my brain tingle, or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, we looked at the scientific method recently. We saw its origins in the 1600s. And
it's very like straightforward again way to discover evidence of whatever your hypothesis is. And I really like that process, and that it's repeatable. But I didn't, for whatever reason, I didn't really like math. So science, having a lot of math, that was kind of a conflict for me. But I really did like science. But science and music were definitely, and then obviously socializing. But science and music were my favorite classes. But I really like history too. I wouldn't say I'm a history buff, but it's just, I love people's stories. And I guess regardless of if it's history or right now, or maybe even making up something for the future, I just love people's stories when it's like true to life, or at least they're being really authentic. I truly believe that we are all billions of reflections of one world soul. And so just like we are here to gain perspective, and I really am into that. And I think you gain more perspective through people's stories than what they can talk about as far as data and facts and stuff like that.
Yeah, like there's more context to stories. And when you look at someone's life, you see a beginning date and an end date and where they're located.
Different chapters.
Yeah, You're growing up in St. Louis. You decide to go to Mizzou for university.
Well, I actually started at Hampton University my freshman year in college.
Where's that?
And I have, it's in Hampton, Virginia. It's on the East Coast. Yeah.
That Hampton University.
Yeah, that Hampton University right there.
Okay, I didn't know this
in
part
Hampton
about,
Roads, yeah.
about Darian. All right.
So, yeah, I could tell you about my college education. Speaking of education.
Tell me about going to school in Virginia.
Yeah. Oh, man. I really liked Virginia. I liked the area. I liked the people that I was meeting, because most of them came from the East Coast. A lot of them came from Virginia and Maryland, but a lot of them also came from New York, Philly, North Carolina, Florida, Georgia. And, like, I'd never really met a lot of people from those areas. The only family I knew was really from North Carolina and South Carolina. So
I'm baffled. I'm sorry. We were just talking earlier about how there's a connection to that part of Virginia with this lineage story.
Yeah, right. And then I end up going to school in Virginia. Yeah. But it was just.
What did you, when you were leaving high school, what did you want to study? What was the impotence for further learning, and why Virginia?
Yeah, so I wanted to study biology, which was a total fluke. I wanted to be an engineer, a mechanical engineer, since I was 5 years old.
Future proof.
And in between my grandfather having issues with his heart and then me skipping class in high school to go visit a hospital for like some exploration trip, I decided I wanted to be a doctor in my senior year of high school. I had gone to Rolla the summer before for an engineering exploration thing where we like spent an intensive 2 or 3 weeks there learning how to do different wiring and like physics and all this stuff. And my senior year I was like, nope, I'm gonna study biology, because I was like, I'm gonna become a cardiovascular surgeon to heal my grandfather's heart in my mind, in my little 17-year-old mind.
Core.
Yeah, right. Another heart thing. Wow, you're just picking up on this. And then of course the story is that on that exploration trip, I'm the type that doesn't like to go along with the crowd. And so we were taking a group tour. I was like, this is boring. I'm going to dip off into this little break room and just kind of like collect my thoughts. And there was just one guy in there using green scrubs. I'll never forget it. And to me, he looked like he was mid-30s. I don't know. I was 17, so who knows. But I just started talking to him. Forget his name. I want to say it was Dan. But I started talking to him about his job, and he was a cardiovascular surgeon. And so I was like, what's the best part of your job? And he was like, I get to save lives every day and this and that. And I was like, well, what's the worst part of your job? And he was like, honestly, it's really the struggle of the time and like having to work so many hours and not being able to perform at my job the way I want to. And after that conversation, it was only like 20 minutes. I met up with the rest of the group, but it made such an impact on me. I was like, you know what? I think I want to be a cardiovascular surgeon. And that was literally the day it changed from being I want to be a mechanical engineer and nobody really understanding what that was at 5 years old, to be like senior year wanting to be a doctor. And so I went to Virginia mostly because my best friend went there. Hampton has one of the best marching bands in the country. And so he was in marching band, and he wanted to go play for them. And so
what did he play? What's his name?
Brian. And he was in the drum corps. He played everything. He played snare our senior year, I think. But he had played quads, he had played bass drum. And then when you get to college, they make you start at the bottom, so you play cymbals. But so that was the reason why I was going there. His family is also from the Carolinas. I think it's North Carolina. And his father's in the military, so they were actually going to move back there after we graduated from high school. So
there was like a little bit of an anchor being dropped there for you to hold on to as well.
So that's how I ended up there. Yeah, we still talk. We were wishing our friend Joel happy birthday in a text thread the other day. So yeah, that's how I ended up in Virginia. I had applied to schools all over the country, from Pennsylvania, Virginia, Georgia, Illinois, and Mizzou, of course, just kind of like a fallback. And I got into all of them, and I actually had a scholarship to one, but it wasn't big enough to really make a difference. So I ended up going to Hampton. for a
Okay,
year.
and you go to Hampton and you're going for cardiovascular
Just biology at that time.
For biology, right? With that focus. And tell me about what that was like. You know, was there a culture shock from living in St. Louis and Missouri to going to Hampton and
For
living
sure.
in Virginia?
The Southern hospitality almost shocked me. Because St. Louis, it's a mix of everything, but I do feel like it has a very East Coast vibe when it comes to the people. East and South, I would say, mix.
It's the show me state. You got your stripes here, too.
Yeah, right, exactly. It doesn't seem to me, we're not the person to just, like, anybody will say hi to you on the street, right? I notice that more in New York.
South of Richmond. You get that, like,
Yeah.
you get that, you know, in the South, I would say. From my experience, I've always felt like Missouri is part of the South.
Yeah,
Especially
yeah.
St. Louis.
Yeah.
But you're in a city here, so you're not necessarily
Right, the
saying
city
hey to
vibe.
everyone.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
Yeah, on campus, everybody would say hi, and I'd be like, what? Why are you talking to me? You know what I mean? At first, and I was like, oh, okay, let's be friendly. This is cool. It took me by surprise. That was a very big shock. And even outside of campus, it was sort of like that. So it's very, very surprising that it was like that. The other thing that stood out to me was the East Coast vibe was way stronger out there, obviously. So there were a lot of Timberlands, like Averex jackets. At the time, Iceberg Slim was a big popular brand, and it just seems like the East Coast was kind of dictating the fashion
So
out
this was like late 90s?
there. That would have been 99 and 2000 was the year that I spent at Hampton.
Okay, all right. Gotcha.
Yeah.
So, like, you were not in Virginia for 9/11.
No, I was at Mizzou.
Okay.
Oh man, I remember that very vividly.
So I thought it was interesting you were talking about when you were 9 and in 3rd grade. I was in 3rd grade when 9/11 happened.
Wow.
And I was living in Virginia. But tell me about Mizzou. And first off, just to backtrack a little bit,
Sure.
we're in 99, 2000, studying biology at Hampton University.
Right.
Why didn't you end up graduating from there? Like, you know, why was it only those 2 years?
For sure. Well, specifically because it was a private school, they had a lot of rules that I, as a wanting to be independent young man, didn't agree with. And as example, we couldn't have visitation from the opposite sex in our dorm really all year. They said until spring semester. We didn't end up getting clearance for it until April, and then we were out of school in May. So it basically ended up being the whole year. And then freshmen and sophomores couldn't park on campus. I think that was more of a capacity thing, but still kind of stupid. It should be first come, first serve. You had to dress up like a shirt and tie or a dress if you were a young woman to go to this certain, I guess it was like an auditorium. But it's called Ogden Hall. Yeah, Assembly Hall. Called Ogden Hall. So anytime you enter that building, you'd better be wearing that, or they might turn you away. And a lot of teachers adopted this happens everywhere, I think, but like more so across the board at Hampton. You couldn't be on time to class. You had to be early. So if you were on time
in high school,
if you were on time, they'd lock the door on you.
If you're on time, you're late.
Yeah. So I get that, but like we're here. The point is to educate us. So like you locking me out is not helping me get my education, right? Right. Yeah, that I'm paying for. That your salary is being paid somewhat by me. So I just didn't like those types of things. Oh, and young people at the time like to wear do-rags in public, and they were talking about it. I don't think, hopefully they never made a rule about this, but they were talking about outlawing wearing do-rags in public on campus. So like,
I was going through school at this time, I think around that same 99, 2000 era.
Yeah.
I remember I had this bandana that I would just wear as a headband.
Okay,
and it was fine one year, and then the next year it was considered a head covering.
Interesting. Yeah, so I just didn't like those rules, and I ended up transferring to Mizzou. But then going back to not having very good study skills, I spent 2 years at Mizzou and ended up failing out. At that point, I went to North Carolina A&T because my dad was an alumni of that school, and he knew people that could help me get in. Not that I was like terrible student, but like it because I had like
shown on paper.
Yeah, exactly. I wasn't showing it on paper. So I got in there, got my grades up, and came back. But it was a significant experience to be there because when my dad was there, it was the height of the civil rights movement. And so 64 through 69, or 64 through 68. when he was there. And he and some other students ended up having a shootout with the National Guard troops. And so there were some bullet holes still in the dorm that I stayed in. There were still bullet holes in one of the walls outside. And people thought it was from gang activity, but having had my dad there to kind of give me a tour before I started, I understood that was not the case.
From the civil rights.
Mm-hmm. And so
wait, this was North Carolina A&T.
Yes.
I don't think I've ever heard about this conflict with the National Guard. I feel like we all hear about
it wasn't
one of the other
universities. I don't think it was even
like Bowling Green or something like
maybe
that.
in the newspaper, but I don't think it was televised. Because I think it was one student died, which because they were black, it didn't matter at the time. And my dad tells me a story about him being on the roof with a shotgun and, taking on fire but not being hit. It was him and like 4 or 5 other students in this firefight. But because of that,
protecting protesters,
basically just I think it was as a result of a protest that was going on, and then most people had fled. They had a plan that if troops come and start anything, then we will go arm ourselves and then respond. So yeah, I think it was basically arming themselves against people that had violently broken up a protest. And so that dorm ended up getting torn down not long after I went there. But because I had told people that were still going there, they ended up preserving that wall, and it's now in a museum on campus.
Wow.
Yeah. So, again, a lot of things are like serendipitous. Yeah. I was there for a reason, right? Like, I don't think, if I wasn't there to tell that story, I don't know if that wall gets preserved or if that story is even carried on.
Or if you didn't have enough study skills to then go there.
Yeah.
So you're at North Carolina A&T.
Mm-hmm.
Is that for 2 years, 4 years? How long are you
1
there?
year.
1 year. And then what happens after that?
Transferred back to Mizzou
Okay.
on academic probation, but then got my grades up. And honestly, developed some study skills. I had to learn how to use flashcards and like a number of other things. I started using the Student Success Center, is what they call it now, to get tutoring and things like that. Yeah, just developing my study skills, and finally graduated.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Nice. Okay, so in Mizzou, you graduated, so you're kind of shuffling through these schools. Are you still doing biology?
Mm-hmm. Biology the whole way through. Finished with a
So
degree.
you graduated with a biology degree.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So how did we get here? So tell me more. What become a doctor?
I was a scientist for 7 years. So when I graduated, though, I didn't have a job in my field. I was just working at the same hospital where I was born. My friend Reggie, who sent me a text while we were sitting here, his mom was like a supervisor in the business services at St. John, so she got me a job. But as I was just kind of like networking and things like that, I ran into a lady that ran the undergraduate research program at Mizzou. So I did some research in labs at Mizzou and kind of started taking that track instead of pre-med, because at first I wanted to be a doctor, right? But then I just didn't like the culture of medicine. Getting that opportunity.
What was the culture of medicine like, and why didn't you like it?
It's very type A personality, like very cutthroat. I can give one story that would illustrate that example for me, at least. In undergrad, being in cell biology class, we had a pretty competitive cell biology class, probably 130 people in it. And like to do well, it was kind of an indicator if you were going to med school or not, at least at Mizzou. And so there was this one girl I was in a study group with. It was like 4 or 5 of us. And we were in a room in the Arts and Sciences building. We were studying the notes from the class from the day before. And someone else from a different study group came in and asked this young lady for her notes. And so she goes in her backpack and pulls out a separate set of notes. And I was like, I let the person leave. I didn't say anything at first. And I was like, oh, do you just like make multiple copies of your notes or whatever? And she's like, no, actually the notes that we're studying from now are my personal notes. Like I have some things that I wouldn't necessarily give to everybody else because I want to be ahead of the curve. So I make a separate set of notes because a lot of people ask me for my notes. They know I'm doing well in the class. So I have kind of a dumbed down version of my notes that I give to other people. And I was like, that's insane to me. Like, right. Like, I understand you want to do better, but just do better. Like, you don't have to, like, handicap other people, like, or just say you don't want to let them borrow your notes. Like, you don't, that's a lot of effort to go through to make sure that you're doing better than everybody else. And that was the moment where I was like, well, if like most people, and I started to notice that in other people, not that degree, but like just that level of like competitiveness. And I was like, if this is the culture of people that are in medicine, I don't want to be a doctor. So I was like, what else can I do with a biology degree? And so, yeah, I went to my counselor after that, and he was married. His name was Mark Kirk, and he was married to a lady named, gosh, I can't remember her name now. I can remember him because I had to go to him a lot. Man, I'll remember it after this, I'm sure. But she was the head of undergraduate research at Mizzou, and he was like, oh, you should maybe talk to my wife. It sounds like you might be more in line with the research track. And so...
like really living in the scientific method.
Yeah, for real. I never thought about it like that. And the way he explained
when
it...
I think of a doctor, yes, there's some scientific method, but you don't have so many options for trial and error because if you fuck up, you fuck up.
Yeah,
then you don't have an opportunity to try again.
Yeah, you might get sued, you might lose your practice.
May lose their life for it. So, you have to have the answer, and the experiments are done by the research to then apply in the hospital or in the doctor's office. Yeah, makes sense. Yeah. So living in the scientific method and the research part of Mizzou, it sounds like.
And at that point I was like, well, maybe I can figure out how to create an artificial heart that would like help my grandfather and things like that, or if I make some wild discovery that is beneficial for multiple people, then I would still be helping the world. So I just went for research after that.
Okay, so your biology degree with the focus in research, and then working at St. John's Mercy Hospital.
And so then I ended up running back into the lady that ran undergraduate research, and she was like, I just was at a conference where I met a guy from WashU that I think you should apply for working in his lab, and his name was Bob Mercer. Hopefully he's still around. I actually don't know.
Bob Mercer?
Uh-huh.
Conversation continues. Part 2 of this episode of the High Context Podcast. Stay tuned for more with our side stories, and be sure to connect with us on social media at High Context Podcast on Instagram.
business leaders, whatever, would use whatever influence they had to take back the land. So the overwhelming majority of newly freed African people that got land had it taken back. Apparently in South Carolina, according to a real estate attorney that I talked to about the land, said that in South Carolina in particular, there were a lot of former slave owners that just let the people have the land because they had the guilt. I don't know if there's more guilt there than other places, but for whatever reason, the land that passed to African people stayed in their hands. And so that seems to be because Friday Great is my great-great-great-grandfather. He is Marianne Wigfall's father. And she's the one that is on the deed that I found when I went to South Carolina. So come to find out that it was from Friday Great's estate. It was bought by the county for $19.10 by the sheriff in 1934, and then bought back by his daughter Marianne for $56.10 or 18 cents in 1938. So Friday Great was born enslaved in 1840 and died in 1890 something, or like early 1900s, because he's still on the deed up to 1915, I believe.
So Marianne Wigfall gets the land back.
Yeah, she bought the land back. So that's the origin, seems to be from field order number 15. It was taken away, but then she bought it back. And then it's been kind of chipped away ever since then. It originally started as 26 and a half acres and now down to 13.
And then your cousin's father was bequeathed this from one.
So yes, so he was the protector of the land because he was the deputy sheriff. Anybody that had influence, he also had dirt on them. So regardless of them trying to use their influence, he could use their dirt to revoke it. Whatever they were trying to do, it didn't matter. But then he died of COVID in November 2020. So we lost the protection. And then not long after that, some people tried to burn down the house on the land a relative was living in. She's not blood Wigfall, but she married into the family and she still lives on the land. They tried to burn her house down twice in 2021 to send a message, and it was in between getting letters to like, hey, you should sell your land or whatever.
That's some 50s stuff.
Yeah, right? And it's so funny because the first time she was scared, but that made her get security cameras. So the second time she got them on camera, and then the news reported it. You can find it if you look up Pawleys Island Wigfall house burning or something like that. You'll find it. People have been trying to get it ever since my cousin's father passed. He immediately got a letter from a real estate agent and this was during the Trump administration. The president's about to change. You should sell the laws might change for real estate. You should sell your property as fast as you can. I guess
he was still, yeah, okay.
Yeah. November 20th, the election happened then. But yeah, he wasn't technically out yet because I think the letter came in late November. We were like, oh, we need to do something about this because this isn't going to stop. This isn't new. It's not something that hasn't been tried before, but we also don't have our leverage anymore. So yeah, the passing of his father kind of set it all off, and the passing of my father is what puts me in a position to be making decisions and honestly espousing this story about the family that no one seems to have known before. Even though my cousin Veronica does a lot of Gullah Geechee research. My people on my dad's side, the Wigfalls, are Gullah Geechee people, but I don't think she did it specifically on our family, and so none of this other history about white Wigfalls being captains in the Revolutionary War and the British arms and the Scottish arms. We didn't know anything about that, or Lewis, or I don't even think we knew about August. Someone named John Baker wrote about him, who is...
So Gullah Geechee being from South Carolina or being from Africa?
Yeah, so Gullah Geechee is a South Carolina, Georgia culture of African people that were living on the islands off the coast, and so because of that isolation, they were able to keep more of their culture within the community. So they still have what you might call a circle dance. The language they speak is you would call it Geechee because it's kind of like a broken English with an African accent. If you hear any of my cousins from that area, you probably would not be able to understand them for a while. It's very similar to Cajun, but not like that, Southern. It's more, if you ever hear someone that lives in Africa now talking, more sounds like that. I think the islands were called Gullah at one point, so that's where Gullah comes from. And then Geechee is a reclaimed term. It was actually a derogatory term for a long time, but it's reclaimed by the folks there to be their language and their culture.
Well, I really appreciate you espousing all of this and diving into the details with me and helping with production on High Context. Was there anything that I forgot to ask?
I think you got it all. I got notes, but there's like maybe one other question you had that I was like, ooh, that's a good one.
Was there anything about like High Context or what we are, embarking on with sound activism that you'd like to share, or what intention you have for this project? Or, I had something that, a goal. I would love a goal of High Context to be to turn STEM into STEAM. To put the arts in, as just as important as technology and engineering and math and sciences.
Real.
And that for that concept to be more mainstream instead of only a third of the people really knowing about it.
Yeah. I think my intention for High Context as a podcast is to help people understand that we don't live high context lives for the most part. We live in very low context existences, and
our systems.
Yeah, and our systems definitely not force or coerce, but like facilitate us. Provide a framework for us to be in low context, and use this podcast as a way to figure out where your high context is for your own life.
And inversely, I see high context cultures such as music and arts and cannabis, like, and uncovering the past and education, like all of these are high context realms.
For sure.
Existing within a low context structure, and how can we sometimes, using high context values in a low context world and low context values in a high context world.
Yeah. Both are needed.
Navigating all of this. Yeah.
Going back to the fractals.
Yeah. Are you feeling whole and complete?
Yeah. Thank you. This is a great conversation. I can't wait to interview you next.
Yeah. I think I may need to rest up.
Maybe not today.
My origins. You did great on your origin story. I feel like I would take 3 times as long. Just like, and then on this day I did this.
That's okay. I think that's kind of the point of this podcast.
If you're the listener and you got this far.
Yeah, right. If you've listened this far.
Thank you to you
for
engaging and listening.
Man,
where can folks interact with you and your projects?
I am on social media, Facebook, Darian Wigfall, Darian Wigf as in Frank, ALL. Instagram, Darian that's Twitter. X, formerly Twitter, Darian _Wig. Instagram, DJ Whiz, WHIZ_STL. Also have a website, DarianWigfall.com, and the certain media website is allaboutthelevelup.com.
Do you want to tell folks about the last project you worked on, your new EP?
Yeah, I just put out a EP that is a mirror image of a friend's EP, Jelani, who we talked about. Mine is called the Professor EP. That's my production name, because I like to keep things in different buckets. DJing is different hats. DJing is different than production. It's different than management. So like I try to keep those things kind of separate for people. So yeah, for production I go by the Professor, and then we also through certain media release the BaqBeet EP. So the BaqBeet EP and the Professor EP are out on streaming platforms now. Please go listen. I would love your feedback. And
I actually added both to St. Louis Newness 2024.
Thank you.
That one's on Spotify right now, but monthly I'm going to port it over to Tidal.
Okay.
In order to keep in touch with the High Context Podcast. Right now we're just on Instagram at High Context Podcast. And for the future of sound activism, it's just at Sound Activism on Instagram.
Sweet.
And my name's Ace. I go by Atomic Ace these days, so my Instagram handle is at I am Atomic Ace.
Sweet.
My personal right now is at Ace the Girl from Space. That one's I've kind of had the longest, so kind of keeping that legacy a little bit.
Well.
And we'll be doing this with many other guests. Lots of potential guests came up in this conversation.
Yeah,
and
for sure.
A mission of High Context is to help facilitate and inspire. All power to all the people. So I think we're gonna sign off with that, with each time. And when we said it earlier together, it really resonated with both of us. So we'll sign off.
Indeed.
Yeah.
All power to all the people.
Thanks for listening.